All right, oops. Start here. So, evolution notes part two. This is section 5.5 out of your textbooks. You got a cool evolution of Batman, where it started to where the symbol is now. Okay, but moving on. So, we're looking at sources of inherited variation. So, we talked in the last video about natural selection, okay, where it states that individuals that are better adapted to their environment will contribute more offspring to the next generation. So the offspring will carry the genes from their parents, so will then be better adapted for the environment as well. Over time, natural selection leads to a change in those traits of a species as a whole. When those traits become so much that like the whole species is now has that trait, okay, that's what we call evolution. Okay, so natural selection can only occur when there are variations. So there has to be a difference in traits of an individual that make up the species. Okay, so where do these differences come from? Okay, it can be answered by looking mostly at our genetics, which is really why, like, when they were looking at, like, when we think about like Lamarck and his theories and stuff, he had no idea. They didn't know what genetics were back then, and so it made it really hard to figure out why are these species changing, why, how does giraffe get a long neck, anything like that. Okay, so variability can arise from two processes, okay, in genetics, so mutations and from sexual reproduction. Okay, so the first one is mutation. So DNA is found in the chromosomes of cells. We've talked about this lots in the past in different courses. Okay, so we have our cell. In the nucleus of our cell, we have our chromosomes. Our chromosomes are bundles of DNA. Okay, again, DNA is composed of sequences of 4 different nucleotides. Okay, those nucleotide bases are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. So A, T, and G, and C. So A's always will bond to T's, G's always with C's. The order of these bases form a code, which, when read by the cell, gives an organism specific traits. Genes are segments of the DNA code for specific traits, and each gene is a specific DNA sequence. Okay, DNA is therefore like a blueprint for a particular individual of an organism. So along the DNA, it has a gene for eye color, a gene for hair color, a gene for male or female. Some more has to do with the chromosomes, but the way the genes are put together. Again, so the DNA is our blueprint, how we're all set up. Okay, in most cases, the DNA of an organism will remain the same throughout its life. Sometimes the DNA changes can occur and entirely new genetic information occurs. Okay, mutations are random changes in the DNA itself, and they can provide a continuous supply of new genetic information. Okay, mutations can be caused by a few different things. Okay, environmental factors. Okay, some examples: chemicals or radiation. Okay, or replication errors. So when each new cell is being made, it has to copy the gene from the previous cell. Okay, so that it has the same genome as the original one. Okay, when it's copying them, sometimes there can be an error when it's replicating it, and that will cause a variation or a mutation. Okay, and like environmental, like this radiation, we know like we get cancer when we are exposed to too much radiation. Okay, cancer is a change in the cells and makes them reproduce faster and causes tumors and so on. So there are many types of mutations. Some involve loss or duplications of the entire portions of the DNA, while others just affect a couple of nucleotides in the sequence. Mutations are rare in individuals, but looking at a large population over many generations, the number of mutations is substantial. Okay, there are 3 types of mutations. Okay, there's harmful mutations. Okay, so that'd be like getting those cancer cells neutral mutations, so really it doesn't benefit the person in this case, or beneficial mutations, which now they benefit in one way or another. So we'll talk a little more about each one. So neutral mutations really have no effect on the organism. So reproductive success or any of that really doesn't matter, okay, because of these neutral mutations. Harmful mutations reduce an organism's fitness, and the fitness is how much they can reproduce, basically. Beneficial mutations increase an organism's fitness so they can reproduce more, or reproductive success. So they're going to be the ones that reproduce and form the next generation. Okay, so this is out of your textbook, some mutation misconceptions. Okay, so mutations occur when needed in response to environmental challenge. So this would be kind of Lamarck's theory, where if a giraffe really wants the leaves at the top of a tree, it just needs to stretch its own neck to make that happen. Okay, that's not how mutations occur. Okay, mutations are random. Okay, harmful mutations are a lot more common than beneficial ones. Okay, and there's no design to do it. Okay, and then another misconception, since harmful mutations are more common than beneficial mutations, they can accumulate and a species will steadily degrade. Okay, that's not like, it makes sense that there are more harmful ones, or we know that there are more harmful ones, but it's not going to get into the next level of the species. Usually harmful mutations are selected against, and therefore they don't accumulate over generations. Okay, most of the ones that have these harmful mutations aren't going to make it to adulthood in order to reproduce. So the environmental favors the fittest organism. So harmful mutations can reduce or even eliminate an individual's chance at reproductive success. Okay, and so in humans, this is a little bit different. We have more diseases and things like that that make it to, like, people with those diseases might make it to reproduce and so on, because of our modern medicine. But like, if you're an animal and you're born with 3 legs instead of 4 and you need 4 to run, well, you're going to be the first one that the coyotes or the wolves hunt down. If you're a deer with 3 legs, you're not going to make it. And so most of the time, those mutations are going to cause so that you don't get that reproductive success. Again, and the last one, mutations are random or chance events, then evolution is just pure chance. Okay, so that's the next misconception. And so although beneficial mutations are really rare, when they happen, they're selected for. So those individuals are the ones that will reproduce. So they can accumulate over generations, and then their beneficial mutations often give to individuals improved survival and reproductive success. And so, like, we're sitting at home now because of COVID. Well, part of COVID is if you think about, like, we can't treat it as well and we can't find a vaccine because it's continually changing and stuff. And so part of that is, like, if you think of bacteria and you're washing your hands and your soap says it kills 99.9% of the bacteria, well, that 0.01% of bacteria, okay, they have beneficial mutations that they don't die with those antibacterial soaps. And so they're the ones that can reproduce because they're the ones left living. And so now all of their offspring that have this beneficial mutation that can survive the antibacterial soap are now the ones reproducing, and now the soap's not helping or anything like that. And so, like, that's what we're always kind of worried about, is these super bugs that aren't going to die when we use what used to kill them. Okay, so sexual reproduction and variation. So this is so the first variation we get is from mutations. Okay, the other one's from sexual reproduction and variation. So in a species that undergoes asexual reproduction, like bacteria, an individual reproduces without a mate. Okay, and so that's that organism that can survive, it can reproduce, and everything is the exact same as itself. It's making genetically identical copies to themselves every time they reproduce. The only time a parent, sibling, or offspring is different is when a mutation occurs. Okay, and so that one that got the mutation, if it reproduces, then you get a whole population, okay, with the exact same DNA, unless there's another mutation that occurs. Okay, being from completely identical to one another means that what affects one will affect all of them unless there's a mutation in one of them. Okay, so if a disease is killing off the parents, it's likely the assumption that the whole population will be killed. So that's why, like with bacteria, usually we get like the 99.99%, even sometimes we'll get 100%, okay, that we're able to kill off because they're all the same. So if we find something that kills one, they're all going to get killed. In contrast, organisms that reproduce sexually create offspring that are genetically unique, meaning they are completely different from their parents and siblings. So this form of reproduction gives rise to all the variability in species that we see and explains why you don't look exactly like your parents, but there are some similarities. So sexual reproduction or sexual reproducing species therefore have many traits on which natural selection can act. Okay, so there are 3 reasons why sexual reproduction provides these variations. So the first one is offspring has 2 copies of each gene, one from their mom, one from their dad. So they have a unique set of traits because they're getting they're getting 2 different copies. Okay, and then the assortment genes the offspring get from either parent is determined randomly. So this is why siblings will have differences in traits. The larger the number of genes in a species, the greater genetic variability of the species as a whole. And so that's why, like, depending on what genes your parents carried, each time they have a new child, all of those traits are randomly put together. And so they're not going to look the same. Okay, and then with sexual reproduction, different mates are sometimes chosen. Each set of parents that reproduce adds new genetic information to the population of the species. And so, like in a lot of animals, okay, they have different mates each year, which gives different genetic information, and then along with mutations and so on, especially beneficial mutations, okay, it's going to change the population as a whole. Okay, the booklet, you're just working on your topic 5.5 assignment. We're not going to be doing this booklet this year. Okay, again, if you have any questions, let me know.